Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Beck Pack. I am the Senior Director of Individual and Community Engagement at Safe Horizon. Welcome to Tea Time with Liz Roberts and Dr. Lisa O'Connor, Safe Horizon's CEO and Deputy CEO. Quickly before we get started, I wanted to let you all know that we'll be recording today's session. Okay. So again, yeah, my name's Rebecca, but I go by Beck. And I work in Safe Horizons fundraising team. Thank you so much for joining us today for tea time. I wanted to go over a couple of little housekeeping items before we jump into the agenda, and before we get to know our exciting panelists. So we will be launching polls throughout today's webinar. This is really for us to get to know you all a little bit better. Later in the webinar, you'll have an opportunity to learn more about Liz and Lisa, but these polls are really our opportunity to learn about you. If you have questions throughout the webinar, I encourage you to use the Q&A feature. We do have a dedicated section at the end of the webinar for questions. So do continue to put your questions in there and we'll try and get to them at the end. We'll also be answering some of those questions throughout. So you may see that information popping up as well. And if we don't get to your question, you can let us know after the webinar and we'll make sure we get you that information because we want to make sure that you all get what you need from us. Okay. So the first thing I would love to ask you all is related to our favorite beverages. So this is what I'm drinking this morning, a hot coffee. My caffeine will hit in probably 10 minutes, and you'll all see. I'd love for you to pop in the chat. Like, what are you all drinking this morning? What gets your motor running on a rainy Tuesday morning, depending on where you are? All righty. Gonna open this up. I can see we've got some hydrating people. Good on all those people who are already drinking water. My doctor would be very proud of you. Hibiscus tea. Ooh, Costa Rican dark roast. Oh, I see an Aussie Lipton coffee with condensed milk. Ooh, yum. I love a Vietnamese coffee. Lots of coffees, yeah. I think she's got to be the number one, right? Coffee. Seeing some very exciting ones in here that make me want to run to the supermarket, though. Ooh, Earl Grey with condensed milk. Yummy. Alrighty. Let's jump into what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself. Now it's time to share a little bit about Safe Horizon. But let me start by outlining what we're going to go over today. I'll kick us off with a brief overview about Safe Horizon. Even if you are familiar with our organization, chances are you don't know all that we do. And real talk, I have worked for the organization for 2 years and I still am constantly learning new things. So it's always important for us to start that way by giving an explanation of all the different types of services we provide. That way, if you or someone in your life needs support, you know that Safe Horizon is there. And then I'm going to introduce you to Liz Roberts, our CEO, as well as Dr. Lisa O'Connor, who is our Deputy CEO. And the ladies are going to talk to us about their post-election reflections and go over their priorities for 2025 and beyond. And then I'll talk you through how you, as important members of our community, can support and help survivors. And then finally, we'll wrap up with our Q&A. So just a reminder again to add your questions to the Q&A throughout. You do not need to save adding questions until the end. You can do that all the way throughout the webinar. Okay, so let me start us off by giving a bit of an overview of what we do at Safe Horizon. So we are the largest organization in the US that supports people who have experienced violence, who have experienced abuse or exploitation. And each year, Safe Horizon supports 250,000 people, which is truly enormous. Sadly, it doesn't feel like we can close our doors anytime soon, but we are able to do this work thanks to you all. We operate from 150 locations across all 5 boroughs in New York City. And the types of services and support that we provide are a combination of immediate and long term. And they include the support that we offer folks who call our 3 hotlines, people who come to our domestic violence shelters and reside there on their way to independence, our services for homeless and unstably housed youth, the support that we offer children who have experienced physical and sexual abuse. A lot of the work we do with victims and survivors of violence is safety planning. We have an incredible counseling center that is specialized in helping people after experiencing trauma. We have support for survivors of trafficking. We are in the courts and we provide a number of services there. Fun fact, that's where Safe Horizon was birthed. I guess that's the right way to, to phrase it. That was our first program, one of our court-based programs. And finally, we have advocacy for people who are victims of crime. Now, in addition to all of those robust direct services where we're working one-on-one with people, we also have advocacy and research programs that really help us address laws, policies, systems that are harming victims and survivors of violence, abuse, and exploitation. Okay, now that you've learned a little bit more about Safe Horizon, this is our opportunity again to learn a little bit more about you. And we're going to do that this time. Instead of using the chat, I'd like you to answer using the audience poll that's going to pop up. Okay, so we have 3 statistics, and we would love for you to answer. Which of these 3 statistics surprises you the most about violence and abuse in the United States? 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 2, less than 50% of violent crime is reported to the police. And 3, overall, unaccompanied homeless youth represent 6% of the total homeless population in the United States. Okay, I'll give you a few moments to add your responses. Okay, so at the lowest, it looks like you're the least surprised. Actually, it's very similar. Surprise regarding 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience severe physical violence. Similarly, a similar percentage of you all are surprised by the fact that less than 50% of violent crime is reported to the police. And look, that based on those 2 stats, like that does tell us a bit of a story. I think we have, we talk more about domestic violence. We have in the last couple of decades, and our knowledge of it has increased. Similarly about violent crime. And I do unfortunately think that the challenges that young people, especially unstably housed young people experience are often are the things that aren't focused on. So I think it's unsurprising that you are most surprised by the statistic that relates to young people, which is overall unaccompanied homeless youth represent 6% of the total homeless population in the United States. Thank you for answering that. Okay. Okay, now let's get to the main event. This is the time that I'm going to, well, I'm going to shortly introduce Liz and Lisa, but first, let me give you their credentials. Okay, so Liz Roberts is Safe Horizons CEO. She joined Safe Horizon in 2010 and has 30 years of experience addressing the needs of survivors of violence and abuse. And prior to Safe Horizon, Liz has served as Deputy Commissioner for New York City's Admin of Children's Services. Dr. Lisa O'Connor is our Deputy CEO. She joined Safe Horizon in 2013 and oversees all of our internal functions, including programs and operations. And Dr. Lisa O'Connor has 20 years of experience in anti-violence work. Oops, stop here. Okay. Liz and Lisa, can you please come on camera for us so the people can see your beautiful faces? All right. Before we get into I guess, like the meaty part of the discussion, ladies, I'd love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. Could we start off with what are you drinking this morning? And you can answer in any order you like.
Good morning, everyone. I am drinking a home brew of hibiscus tea with a orange infused honey. So
Ooh.
feeling a little bougie this morning.
Thank you.
And I have a cup of strong black tea. I always put 2 tea bags in. It's called Signature Black, and I put oat milk in it because I'm a little sensitive to dairy.
Now, Liz, you didn't boil that in the microwave, did you?
Of course not. And I feel very strongly the water has to be freshly boiled. I can, I can deal if that's not available, but it's always my preference.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, before we get into the questions about Safe Horizon and our priorities for the years ahead, I'd love to learn a little bit more about both of you. So you can, I'm going to ask a question. I'd love to hear both of your responses, but you can, whoever feels like they have the burning desire to answer first can jump in. It doesn't need to be too structured. So I would just love to know, tell us a little bit about your personal journeys. What brought you to Safe Horizon? And if there are, particular memories of the work that you've done that you'd like to share, please do.
I love this question because it just reminds me how deeply I care about this work and how much it has changed and improved my life to be in this field and this movement. So I got involved in working with survivors of violence at the age of 17. I was a college freshman and a fierce young feminist, and somebody told me there was a domestic violence shelter near campus where I could volunteer. I signed up and I proceeded to volunteer there every Thursday night all the way through college. And looking back on that, what I remember is that the work I did there on those Thursday nights, answering the hotline and supporting the families that were staying in the shelter, felt more meaningful, more impactful than anything else I did in the course of my week. And so when I graduated, I sought out work in this field, and I've been doing this ever since. And I think it's it's run parallel to my own healing journey because I witnessed violence as a child. And doing this work, supporting survivors, has helped me to get to greater clarity and healing on my own experience, and also just been always incredibly inspiring and moving.
Thank you, Liz. Lisa, same question.
Yeah. You know, I reflect on this question often, and it has kind of similar through lines. You know, I started my very young career working with young people who had been incarcerated for felony offenses. And something that kind of kept coming up with that was issues around poverty and access to resources. And so I thought I actually wanted to be a researcher and started doing work looking at different ways to engage with people and understand more about the way violence and poverty shows up in people's lives. And so I actually went to graduate school to be a researcher. And the first set of programs that I actually started doing research in took me into people's homes. So I actually went and started doing kind of ethnographic work and going into people's homes and learning all about them. People were very generous in kind of what they shared and what they needed. And I actually felt that I wasn't going to make the impact that I wanted to make because research takes so long. And the families that I was seeing in that moment needed something today. And that actually just changed my trajectory in wanting to do. At the time, I did kind of hybrid work of working in research projects that also had a direct service component. And so it allowed me to blend my love of math and kind of systems and science together with actually doing direct service. And everything that I've done since then has been about learning more about people and what systems people are involved in. And so worked for the Administration for Children's Services, where I had the pleasure of working with Liz for many years. And that also grew into wanting to return back to direct service. And so went back and did that. There's always been a part of me that needs to be connected to people in a way that is helpful and useful. And so that's kind of what has led me here.
Thank you, Lisa. I feel similarly that I at times can feel very impatient for change, which is what I was hearing a little bit of. And that is one of the joys of working at Safe Horizon, that you do get to see in very concrete ways how we're able to support people at difficult times in their lives. Because most people don't come to Safe Horizon at the easiest, simplest, most joyful moment in their life. They're normally coming to us at a point where they really need some support from experts. I am very curious, and again, answer in whichever order you like. Who are some of your role models?
I can start. I have lots of role models, and the first folks that usually come to mind when I'm asked a question like this is really my mom and my dad. I'm a child of Jamaican immigrants, and I grew up in neighborhoods with this really strong sense of community. I always joke that my dad knows a guy. So if there's anything that you need, like my dad knows a guy, and it's usually someone in the neighborhood who can support whatever is needed. And I reflect often back on growing up in Brooklyn, kind of knowing all of our neighbors. We took care of each other as neighbors, and that was really important to me because my parents are a collector of people, right? We grew up with play cousins and aunts and uncles, and those are people who are not blood, but they're just as important as my blood family. And so I think about that when I am in this part of my life of really trying to stay connected. And I really look back on those moments of those are the people that really inspire me to show up for other people, because I've seen my parents do it my whole childhood.
Oh, thank you. I love hearing that, and 100% agree about it's not the blood that binds us. It's our values. Liz, same question. Who are some of your role models?
So I was one of those little girls who retreated into books. I was
There are amazing heroes in books.
I was a voracious reader as a child, and I loved anything that had to do with like nature, dogs, horses, outdoors, adventures. So I found a lot of heroes to identify with as a child in those books. And then as a teenager and a young adult, you know, I grew up, like I feel like in my first 12 years, most of the serious books I read were written by men and didn't necessarily resonate with me the way that books written by women do. And so in my teenage years, there was this explosion of feminist literature, and I got to really dig into that. And I found so many powerful voices. I think of Alice Walker, I think of Audre Lorde, I think of Adrienne Rich, who's an amazing feminist poet. And those writers really inspired me because they were willing to name things that had been unspeakable and so courageous. And that, you know, that really inspired me to come into this movement for change.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Lisa. Now let's switch gears a little bit, because I think the question that we all have, and me included, is how the results of the election and the next few years, how they're going to be for survivors of violence, for survivors of abuse, for survivors of exploitation. So yeah, I'd love to let's switch gears. Liz, I'm going to start with you to talk about our major policy concerns. I know we've been doing a lot of work in the background to prepare for many different scenarios to ensure that we're able to provide uninterrupted services to the people that need us most. So could we have a look at the slide that goes over our major policy concerns, please? Just a moment while that comes up.
I'll go ahead and jump right in. So, you know, I want to start by saying that we want to keep the focus in this discussion on Safe Horizon and our clients and the communities we serve, our staff, and what we're anticipating in terms of policy impacts. So this isn't intended to be a broader political discussion, but really focused on our mission and what we're concerned about and what we're preparing for going forward. And we are anticipating that under the Trump administration, that there will be very significant changes to policy and potentially also to funding that will, you know, create new challenges for our clients, for our staff, and for the organization as a whole. Some of the policy issues we're most focused on are immigration, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. Changes in policy around organizational work to undo racism and to foster equity and inclusion in our work. Changes around reproductive rights and LGBTQI plus rights, especially, you know, what we've seen during the campaign around anti-trans rhetoric and sentiments being really fanned up and hyped up. And we also will be watching the issues of housing and homelessness, gun control, police reform, and criminal justice reform. All of those are areas that we care deeply about that impact New Yorkers in very direct ways on a day-to-day basis, and where we could see harmful changes in the coming years. And in terms of funding, about 25% of Safe Horizons funding originates with federal government, some of it directly from federal agencies and some of it by way of city or state agencies. And given the talk about streamlining, shrinking government, you know, we could see impacts on those funding sources as well. So going on to the next slide. As we think about survivors that we work with, oh, sorry, you can go back. Actually, yeah, let's just take the slides down, sorry. We're preparing for concrete tools and skills and information that our staff and clients will need. So one of the things we saw in the first Trump administration was that there were rapid changes in policy and practice, especially on the immigration front. Part of that was due to changes in direction at the by the administration, and part of that was due to litigation that advocates brought forward to try to protect immigrants in particular. And so,
and Liz, do you mind, just in case folks don't understand what litigation, what that term means, could you just quickly just explain it?
Yeah, so I'll give a concrete example. During the first Trump administration, he announced what he called a Muslim ban, which meant that people could not immigrate from a list of predominantly Muslim countries. And it ended up resulting in, for example, people who had residency in the United States but originated from one of those countries not being allowed to come back in, not being allowed to reunify with their families. And so advocacy organizations went to court to stop it, and they were actually able to halt and disrupt that policy in order to, protect the rights of some of those folks who were affected. So we're going to need to be really doing a different kind of safety planning with our clients who are undocumented or may have kind of conditional immigration status. We're going to need to help people plan for, what if ICE did pick you up? What are your concerns about where, different places or ways that you might encounter ICE? We're going to have to make sure that we keep our staff really up to date as the policies evolve and change, so that they can give good information to our clients. And sometimes there's misinformation and even fraud that goes around in an environment as stressful as this could be. And so making sure we're helping people make informed decisions based on real information. We're going to be able to offer virtual appointments, so Zoom therapy, Zoom advocacy for folks who are concerned about coming to our offices.
And I imagine that's common too, right, Liz? Like there's a fear that being virtual gives you that layer of I like space and protection, because people might be scared to come to court or come to one of our offices, and that leaves them more vulnerable.
Exactly. And I think one of my biggest fear is that some of our most vulnerable clients, survivors who identify as trans or queer, survivors who are immigrants, will not get the help they need, will not reach out for support because they're afraid that will entangle them in systems. And so systems that could lead to them being deported. And so we will be working hard to send the message that there is still help for you, and that there are safe and confidential ways to get help, that you don't have to get involved with systems in order to get support and advocacy and resources. So that's going to be really important for us. And, we'll do Know Your Rights training for clients and staff, for example. And then we'll also be speaking out. We'll be humanizing the issues, helping people to see the consequences of these policy changes for survivors, and advocating for more humane policies at every turn. And then, of course, we're looking at the possibility of funding cuts. There are a few funding streams that have particularly been targeted by members of the Trump team. Of course, we don't know what will actually happen. There are checks and balances in our government. The legislature tends to want to protect funding to the communities that they represent. And so that will be a potential safety net. But we have to really be prepared. And so one thing we will be doing, and have already started doing, is really reaching out to our community of supporters and asking people to dig deep and support our work, because the less reliant we are on government funding, the more we'll be able to do in the next few years for survivors, and especially those who are most vulnerable in this time.
Thank you for raising that, Liz. That's such an important point. We do receive a lot of money and support from our government partners. And there are benefits to that, but there are also limitations. It's not very flexible funding. It doesn't allow us to respond to emergencies in the moment, because it can only be used for very specific purposes. So that's a big reason why support from individuals and businesses and family funds that aren't restricted allow us to really respond to the needs of survivors as quickly as possible. Liz, could you, I know this is something that we are still like acquiring information about, but I know there was some talk about like um, that would test our assumptions about what survivors actually need. We're obviously doing a lot of on the ground work, so we know there, but I know there is a wider survey that's happening right now. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I just talked about the policy issues and the funding issues related to the election results. I think the other thing that we're thinking a lot about is also the social and cultural implications. And so, what we just saw is that somebody who was found guilty by a jury of sexual assault and who has been, there are credible accusations by a number of other women of sexual assault, that person was elected in spite of that. And, it makes us curious about how our country, how our communities see and understand sexual violence and sexual harassment, and how that played into this election. And, it makes us concerned that we're really in a period of backlash against the work that we have done over decades to raise awareness and, shed that kind of secrecy that used to exist around sexual assault, around domestic violence. And so, what we realized in looking at the election results is that there is, across our country, we know, and you guys saw the stats earlier, that domestic violence and sexual assault are incredibly prevalent. And that about a third of Americans identify as survivors of violence. And so, that tells us that a significant portion of the folks who voted for both candidates are undoubtedly survivors. And it makes us wonder how that experience played into people's votes and how people are making sense of that. So we're in the midst of running a national survey where we've reached out to survivors across the political spectrum to understand what was on their mind and to understand what survivors need from us now. What kind of leadership and what kind of support are survivors looking for? And we'll be able to publish the results of that in early January and really hope that it sheds light and raises awareness and that it motivates all of us to push back against a narrative that discounts the voices and experiences of survivors, to really counteract that narrative. Because if we turn back the clock to a time when survivors were routinely not believed and not supported, the damage of that will be unfathomable.
Thanks, Liz. This feels like a really good time to switch gears a little. Lisa, could you tell us a bit about how Safe Horizon, our solutions and long-term focus areas for survivors of violence, abuse, and exploitation, please? I'd love to start with our community-focused safety and healing. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So over the last several years, Safe Horizon has been on this journey to develop a new strategic plan that incorporated the voices of our client-facing staff who do this work every day, other providers, partners in government, for us to really be getting a sense of what is it that Safe Horizon needs to be paying attention to, and kind of what overwhelmingly came out of that are some areas of focus that feels really aligned with being real responses to the kinds of concerns that Liz just shared with you. So one element that we're focusing on is community. And this approach really centers survivors' connection to their own community, including family and neighborhood. Communities can be a really important source for healing and safety and power at this time. And when and if other systems that support survivors are retracted, or there's funding that is reduced, or survivors are unable to access that, communities become an even more important part of how people can feel safe. So when you were just describing that people may not feel comfortable coming to an office, coming to the court, people may still feel comfortable in their communities. And so how can we make sure that we are a part of that community access so that people can receive the support that they need and do that feeling safe, feeling private, and feeling seen? So that's one of the kind of areas that we're spending time in building over the next part of our strategic plan.
Thank you, Lisa. And you touched on this a teeny bit in that response already, but could you tell us a little bit more about what Safe Horizon describes as survivor-led advocacy? 'Cause this is such an important and inspiring part of our work.
It is, and I think this is one of the things that is a really strong suit for Safe Horizon, and this approach really has us leaning into and being led by the voices of survivors. The goal is for us to, drive a much bolder advocacy agenda that works to improve the experiences of survivors in New York City. That we want policies and processes that are racially just. We want them to be survivor centered. They want them to be connected to community and really listening to survivors and not just thinking that we know what survivors want. Often in this field, I often hear folks talk about survivors want this and survivors need this. And I want to make sure that as a part of this work that we're actually asking survivors, like to Liz's point earlier, we're asking survivors nationally, what is it that you want and what is it that you need? And not assuming that we know. And so therefore, we're building responses that are really responsive to what people are saying. If they want X, that we are either making sure X is available or we're building X, as opposed to we think something else, and therefore we're not quite listening to survivors. So really leaning into not only listening, but also being led by survivors.
Thank you. And then the final question, can you tell us about how Safe Horizon is bolstering our infrastructure? Like, what does our resource mobilization strategy look like so we know that we can be there for survivors?
This is also another critical part of our strategic plan is around operational excellence and making sure that we have and continue to have a very solid foundation. So we are really proud of how we ensure that our finances are strong and stable and that we are responsibly managing the monies that come our way. And we know that in the years ahead, being financially strong is going to be more important than ever. While our sector may face funding cuts in the future as priorities shift or funding is redirected to other things, we need to make sure that we are ready for anything that comes our way. And so that's what we think about in terms of mobilizing our resources. So in this time, private, flexible dollars can really be a lifeline in kind of uncertain times. And I know, Beck, you're going to share a little bit more about what that could look like. But it's also not just about how much money we have, but also making sure that core pieces of our organization are well-resourced. You saw the stats at the beginning, 150 different locations, 250,000 New Yorkers. That takes a fair amount of kind of things happening and rowing in the right direction for a ship as mighty as Safe Horizon to sail. So it means that we have to have a really strong finance team, a legal team. Our HR team is getting the best talent that we can. Facilities and IT departments are keeping structures up and running. And those are the things that are going to help us navigate when we see unforeseen crises. Like I reflect back on when there was economic losses in the 2000s and even the pandemic, those systems being strong allowed us to continue to pivot. And it's really important. So, for example, for me, that paying staff at a fair and supportive wage really means that this work gets done, right? And so, after all, it really is the staff that show up every day with their incredible expertise that makes what Safe Horizon does important. And so, we need to have the kinds of salaries that will allow staff to do that. And all of that is a part of the foundation that we want to continue to strengthen as we kind of think about what's ahead for us.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. And I know not being able to provide a living wage to our experts, many of whom are survivors themselves, many of whom are responsible for other members of their family, and many of whom are women and people of color. That's so important to us. And from an operations standpoint, I know not being able to provide a competitive salary means that we unfortunately have a higher turnover of staff and more vacancies than we would like, not because there aren't the skills out there, but we have to be able to pay our staff to be able to live in New York City, because as we talked about, that's really where the value comes in. We take a lot of pride and we get a lot of expertise because our staff are living and working in the neighborhoods that they grew up in or that they come from. And it means that we really have a very local, specialized approach. Ladies, please stick around for our Q&A, but feel free to hydrate, sip your hot drinks while we move on to how the audience, our important members of our community, what you can do to ensure that Safe Horizon has the resources and the experts on standby to respond to survivors. So here are the different ways that you can help. You can make a personal donation. If you work for a company that offers matching gifts, please look into that. That is one of the easiest ways that you can increase your impact if your company matches your donation. And if you don't know how to look into that, we have resources on our website, and you are also very welcome to contact any of our staff and we can talk you through that. We encourage folks to consider a monthly donation to our organization. This is especially great if you're somebody who likes to plan things. You want to plan out your contributions for the year. And that way, at the end of the year, when life tends to be expensive around the holidays, your contribution has already, and your impact has already started earlier in the year. A new area of our support programming our supporter programming is our legacy program. So you don't have to be wealthy to have a legacy plan. You can include Safe Horizon in your will. You can name Safe Horizon as a beneficiary of an insurance policy. And these are all things that can happen posthumously, but you can plan for that now. And being transparent with the organization, even if it's not Safe Horizon, if it's another organization, that's so valuable to them because that allows orgs to plan for our future. Another way that you can support is to join Team Horizon. So we have a number of endurance events that we participate in throughout the year as a charity, including the big one, the TCS NYC Marathon that happens in the first week of November every year. We are also hosting a charity team for the upcoming United Way Half Marathon, which is happening in March. So if you or someone in your life is interested in marathons or half marathons, maybe they could run and fundraise on behalf of Safe Horizon. And the bonus there is that you get guaranteed entry into these races that are very difficult to qualify for. Other ways that you can continue to support our work is to raise your own awareness and to educate yourself on the issues that are barriers for people that have experienced violence. So to do that, follow us on social media, subscribe to our email list, and attend future events like this one. And then finally, we would love your voice, your support and your voice in advocacy. It can be to promote a very specific law or change that is important to you that will support survivors. And from time to time, Safe Horizon has specific pieces of advocacy that we push. And again, it's all based on addressing systems and policies that may in fact be harming survivors of violence. Okay, let's get to the Q&A portion. So I'll ask the team to put up some of the Q&A questions so I can address them. Okay, first one. Liz or Lisa, it's up to you who wants to answer this one. But the question is, how can we support, how can domestic violence survivors and community members help Safe Horizon advocate for the resources we need? Actually, I think I can answer that one, to be honest, Liz. Sorry, I might take that one. So we would love for you to contact your I was going to say local members of parliament, but that is the wrong system. Your local representatives, because that's really where it starts. In the same way as we said that's where our staff and our services and values start locally, so does our partnership with our local representatives. So find out who that person is, and two, contact them. They are actually required to respond to any of your inquiries too. So you will get a response, even if it is a little bit delayed. And if you're curious, like what are the changes you'd like to see, or what are the pieces of legislation that are actually harming survivors, we can provide all of that information, and we'll do that in our follow-up as well, how you can stay up to date.
If I can just add to that, we have a Survivor Speakers Bureau that has been going for a number of years, incredible group of folks who speak out on policy issues and just share from their experience. And we're looking to expand that into a Survivors Leadership Council. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, we'll put contact information in the chat for you, and would love to hear from folks so you can learn more about that process.
Awesome.
We will be having a press conference next week. We're trying to get the governor to sign a bill called the Safe Shelter Act, which will increase access to domestic violence shelters across New York State for folks who are in dangerous situations and aren't bringing children with them. The way the system is set up, it's hard to access if you don't have children with you. And so you could turn out for our press conference or write to the governor and let her know you want her to sign that bill.
Thank you, Liz. This question would be for you, Elisa. In terms of Safe Horizons supports in family court with supervised visitation and such, will those services also be impacted after January 20th, and or are they already being impacted?
Sure. So right now, we offer supervised visitation, and just so folks know what that is, it means that there are children who have connections with family members, and there's a risk of safety to that child. And the court has determined that they want to keep connected to a non-custodial parent or grandparent, but it must be supervised. And Safe Horizon provides that supervision of those visits. So we currently operate that in our courts. And right now, we have not heard of anything in particular that makes us specifically worried about supervised visitation. It's a program that continues to operate today. And if and when we do hear something like that, of course, that would be something that we would be kind of mobilizing around to try to find solutions. But at this moment in time, we do not have specific information that makes us worried about supervised visitation.
I've got a question that piggybacks onto something we talked about before, but it's also making me realize that who we support isn't as clear to folks. So I think for a lot of people, the assumption is that we're helping only women and children. So the question is, because we get so much money from government contracts and they come with a lot of strings, does that make it difficult to help men? And so I think this is really a great opportunity to talk about all the work that we're doing to support men who have experienced violence, which that's a population that Safe Horizon is absolutely working with across all of our programs. And I know one of our chats, our safe chat, that's actually where we see more men than women contacting us for help. So yeah, so could you tell us a bit about how Safe Horizons is helping men?
Great question. And, I think that goes back to some of that initial kind of education that we talked about, is that violence doesn't discriminate. And so folks of all genders are experiencing violence, abuse, and exploitation. And Safe Horizon is here to actually support all of the folks who are needing help. We support through our hotlines. We actually have gender inclusive shelters. We provide support in our family court. So we don't have limitations on being able to serve men. I think there is a hesitance sometime of men seeking help, and we actually spend time over many years being very intentional, especially around Black and Brown young men who were experiencing crime but are least likely to receive support. And so we make very intentional outreach to make sure that young people know that we are here to provide support. And so I just encourage people who are feeling like that they don't know where to get help because you are male, that Safe Horizon is a resource for you. And you can contact us through the different kind of resources that has been put in the chat already, but you're not excluded from the community of folks that we serve. We are here to support.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. There were a few similar questions regarding our advocacy, some interest from folks who self-identified as survivors and would like to get involved in our advocacy work, maybe even our Survivors Bureau. So we can follow up with you all about that information. But there's one question here that I think is perfect for ending the Q&A. And that is, and again, to both of you, what are some of the ways that you look after yourself in this work, right? Like it's really difficult work. Supporting staff to do this is really difficult work. And how are the ways that you're looking after yourself so you can come back and do this again for, I think between you have 50 years of experience, so you clearly know how to look after yourselves.
So we really pay a lot of attention here at Safe Horizon to vicarious trauma, which is the impact of hearing stories of violence on the person who's providing support and care to somebody who's been a victim. And so we teach a lot of skills that staff can use in the moment and that supervisors can use with staff to help cope. And I've really come to understand over so many years of doing this work that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so, I need to pause, I need to self-assess. How am I doing? Am I able to show up with my full self today for my colleagues and clients? Is there something I need to address inside me to help me do that? So what's been interesting for me is that what I need changes over time. So there was a period when it was all about meditation. There have been periods where it was all about exercise. There have been periods where it was all about the caring supervision of a more experienced clinician. And I have to keep evolving my self-care strategies.
Thanks, Liz. Same question for you, Lisa. How are you looking after yourself?
I agree 100% with the things that Liz has shared, and I'm reflecting as we're talking that my tools have also shifted over time, and they shift day to day, right? There might be days that what I need is to go outside, and I remind staff all the time to go outside and get some vitamin D just to feel the sun on my face, because that's going to get me connected back to my body in a different way. And other times I don't have exactly what I need, and so what I will do is show up with my colleagues and ask for grace. Right, that there are times
I love that one.
I'm not 100%, and letting my team know that I'm not everything that I need and want to be. And so I'm going to ask for grace from this group. And I think modeling that is so important because we don't have to be martyrs to this work. And so that's a newer practice for me, is being able to be vulnerable in larger spaces and ask for grace when I know that I am struggling. And so I encourage people to kind of think about and reflect on what are you needing in the moment, and finding out where to get that. And oftentimes my colleagues at Safe Horizon have been the folks that have shown up to allow me to do what I need to do.
Thank you. And thank you both for spending your mornings with us. And thank you everyone for joining. We are a few minutes from ending. So before we close, I'd like to just make sure that you all have the resources that you need in case Safe Horizon is an organization that can support you. So you can see up here, we have our domestic violence hotline. We also have our rape and sexual assault hotline. You'll see that they're open 24/7, and that's because we need to be where survivors need us. And so business hours aren't necessarily going to be when survivors can safely and discreetly contact us. We mentioned this briefly earlier. We also have a chat service called safehorizon.org /safe chat, and that allows folks who feel more comfortable to text and message over speaking. And you can go onto our website to see our full range of services. That's safehorizon.org. And I know that there was a lot of interest in our advocacy and our Survivors Bureau. So I'm referring you to the chat, and you'll see that there's an email address there, communications@safehorizon.org. You can always email them as well. And even if you just email any of the Safe Horizon email addresses, that person you get may not be the exact expert you need, but they'll get you to the one that you need. So really just get into contact with us and we'll make sure that you're connected to the right person. All right, well, we are at 10:59. Thank you all for joining us, for sharing a little about you, your knowledge. And Liz and Lisa, huge thank you to you both for spending your morning with us.
Thank you, Beck. Thank you, Liz. Pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and wish you all a great start to 2025.
Thank you, everyone.